My name is Valerie. I am 68 years old, and my occupation is a retired public school principal. Surrounded by the glittering elite of high society, the daughter-in-law I tried so hard to love tore my dignity apart to thunderous applause, while the son I raised from a boy into a man refused to say a single word in my defense. They thought I was just a helpless, forgotten old woman who would quietly accept the public abuse and fade away into the shadows. But they completely underestimated what a mother pushed to her absolute limit is capable of doing to take her life back. The air inside Marcus and Chloe's sprawling luxury estate was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and imported flowers. It was their 10th wedding anniversary gala, and the massive ballroom was packed with 200 of the city's wealthiest socialites. I stood near the edge of the room, pressing my back against the cool wall, feeling painfully out of place in my modest, store-bought navy blue dress. Everywhere I looked, there were tailored tuxedos and custom silk gowns with diamonds catching the light from the massive crystal chandeliers above. The constant clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of pretentious laughter made the atmosphere feel freezing cold. I was standing in the home of the son I had sacrificed my entire youth for, yet I had never felt more entirely invisible. I watched Marcus from across the room. My boy, now a highly successful corporate lawyer, was smiling and shaking hands, looking every bit the success story I had prayed he would become. I was so lost in my own thoughts, remembering the brutal overtime shifts at the school and the skipped meals it took to pay for his education, that I did not see his wife approaching. Chloe did not bump into me by accident. I saw her cold eyes lock onto mine, and I saw the deliberate flick of her wrist. A full glass of dark red wine splashed directly onto my chest, soaking instantly through my dress and running down my faux pearls. The cold liquid shocked my skin. But before I could even gasp for air, Chloe took a dramatic step back. She threw her manicured hands over her mouth in a gesture of exaggerated pity. The live string quartet seemed to stop playing, and the conversations around us died instantly, turning all 200 pairs of eyes directly onto me. Instead of apologizing or handing me a napkin to dry myself, Chloe raised her voice so the entire enormous room could hear her clearly. She sighed loudly and shook her head, putting on a sickening face of fake sympathy. She told the crowd that it was such a tragedy that my dementia was getting so much worse these days, and that I could not even hold a simple glass properly anymore without making a disgusting mess. A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs and quiet mocking laughter swept through the elite crowd. My cheeks burned with a deep, searing heat of ultimate humiliation. I immediately looked across the room to Marcus. I desperately needed my son to step forward to defend his mother, to hand me his jacket, and tell his wife she had crossed the final line. Marcus looked up from his conversation. He met my pleading eyes for one agonizing second. Then he simply looked down at his cell phone and turned his back to me. He utterly abandoned me right there in front of 200 staring strangers. The complete silence from my own flesh and blood was so much more deafening than the cruel laughter echoing off the ballroom walls. I stood there drenched in expensive wine and sharp humiliation. But the true pain did not come from Chloe's cruelty. It came from the memory of everything it took to put Marcus in that room in the first place. When my husband passed away unexpectedly, leaving me a young widow with a little boy who barely understood why his father was never coming home, my entire world collapsed. But I did not have the luxury of falling apart. I dried my tears, locked away my grief, and made a silent vow that my son would never feel the sting of our loss in his future. I became the principal of a demanding public school district, a job that drained every ounce of my energy. But my regular salary was never going to be enough to keep Marcus in the elite private schools that would guarantee his success. So I took on every extra administrative duty and summer school session I could find. I stretched every single dime until it felt like it would snap in half. I wore the same uncomfortable scuffed black shoes for 6 years, using a black marker to colour over the scratches because a new pair meant one less textbook for my boy. There were so many nights I sat at our small kitchen table, reviewing lesson plans until 3 in the morning, rubbing my aching temples, trying to ignore the deep hollow gnawing in my own stomach. I skipped lunches and downsized my own dinners, telling Marcus I had already eaten a big meal at work just to make sure his plate was always full of fresh food. My physical exhaustion was a permanent weight on my shoulders, a dull ache in my lower back that never faded. But every time I saw him bring home a glowing report card or step onto the stage to accept an academic award, the exhaustion magically vanished. I traded my youth, my comfort, and my health to build a fortress of opportunity around my son, believing with all my heart that my endless sacrifices were paving the road to a beautiful shared future. And for a long time, the illusion of that beautiful future held strong. Marcus graduated at the top of his law school class, stepped directly into a prestigious corporate firm, and began a meteoric rise to absolute success. I was so incredibly proud of the man he had become. Then he met Chloe. She came from a wealthy world I only saw in glossy magazines, a world of massive generational wealth, sprawling country clubs, and massive summer homes. When they married, I thought we were expanding our family, but I quickly realized I was being systematically replaced. The shift was not sudden. It was a slow, agonizing fade into the margins of my own son's life. The weekly Sunday dinners we used to share dwindled to hurried monthly lunches and then eventually stopped altogether. My eager phone calls were increasingly sent straight to voicemail, followed days later by brief, sterile text messages claiming he was just too busy with major client mergers. I stopped being invited to the casual weekend barbecues or the elegant holiday parties. My presence in his life was reduced to a mandated 2-hour visit on Mother's Day and a generic greeting card on my birthday. I sat alone in my quiet, empty house and forced myself to swallow the bitter loneliness. I rationalized his absence every single day. I convinced myself that this was simply the natural order of things. I told myself that successful, powerful men did not have time to sit around drinking tea with their aging mothers. I believed that his distance was the ultimate proof that I had done my job correctly. I had raised a fiercely independent, wealthy man who no longer needed me to survive. I accepted my isolation as the final necessary payment for his perfect life. But standing in that freezing ballroom, dripping with red wine, while my son turned his back on me, the illusion shattered completely. I had not raised an independent man. I had raised a coward who traded his own mother for a seat at a table where I was not allowed to sit. The sticky sweetness of the spilled wine clung firmly to my skin, but it was the burning heat of public shame that made it impossible for me to take a full breath. I knew I could not stand under the glaring, judgmental lights of that ballroom for another second. Keeping my head down, I pushed past a group of loudly whispering guests and hurried blindly down the long, dimly lit hallway toward the back of the massive house. I desperately needed a sanctuary, a quiet place to scrub the humiliating stain from my dress and the hot tears from my eyes before anyone else could see me completely break down. I slipped into Marcus's private home office, pulling the heavy, solid oak door shut behind me to block out the noise of the party. The room was dark and quiet, smelling faintly of expensive leather and the rich cologne I bought him for Christmas. I moved quickly toward the small private bathroom attached to the office, my hands shaking violently as I grabbed a damp guest towel to furiously dab at the ruined fabric over my chest. I stared at my pathetic, broken reflection in the mirror, wondering how my life of sacrifice had led to this agonizing moment. Just as I started to compose myself, the sharp click of the office door opening froze the blood completely in my veins. Panic seized my chest, I knew I could not face another mocking look or cruel comment. I quickly killed the bathroom light and pressed my body deep into the shadowed corner behind the half-open door, holding my breath tightly. I heard the sharp, rhythmic clicking of designer high heels sinking into the thick carpet, followed closely by the heavier, familiar footsteps of my own son. It was Chloe, her sister Nia, and Marcus. They had retreated to the quiet office to celebrate the success of their twisted little performance. I stood there in the absolute darkness, terrified that the loud, frantic pounding of my own heart would give away my hiding spot. I expected to hear them laughing at my expense, but the tone of their voices was not amused or light-hearted. It was hurried, serious, and chillingly calculating. They fully believed the room was completely empty, and in that false security, they began to speak freely. The horrible words that drifted through the crack in the bathroom door did not just break my heart all over again. They fundamentally altered my entire reality. "That went perfectly," Chloe said, her voice completely dropping the fake, sugary sweetness she always used for the crowd. Everyone saw her standing there, looking completely vacant and lost. The dementia narrative is officially established. Nia immediately chimed in with a cold, sharp laugh, agreeing that I looked genuinely pathetic, and that the wealthy guests ate the tragic story right out of their perfectly manicured hands. I gripped the cold porcelain edge of the bathroom sink, my tired knuckles turning completely white, as the terrifying layered reality of their private conversation began to unfold. They had not humiliated me in that ballroom just for cruel sport. It was a meticulously planned, highly coordinated performance. Chloe began pacing the floor heavily, her voice tight with a frantic, desperate anxiety I had never heard from her before. She frantically reminded Marcus that her family's bank accounts were practically empty, that their much-flaunted generational wealth was nothing but a massive mountain of hidden debt and fraudulent bank loans. If they did not secure a massive influx of cash within the next 3 months, their entire luxurious facade would completely collapse overnight. They would lose the mansion, the imported cars, and their coveted high society standing. The ultimate solution to their impending bankruptcy, she explained coldly, was my complete destruction. Their grand conspiracy was to use the wine incident as the undeniable foundation for a ruthless legal petition. They planned to declare me mentally incompetent and a severe danger to myself. Their ultimate sickening goal was to force me into a restrictive state-run memory care facility against my will and establish Marcus as my absolute legal conservator. I felt physically sick, my stomach churning violently as Nia laid out the financial prize at the center of this monstrous nightmare. Decades ago, my late husband had left me a large, barren parcel of undeveloped land on the far outskirts of the city. I had always kept it out of pure sentimentality, believing it was basically worthless dirt and overgrown weeds. But Nia proudly revealed the explosive truth. The city council had just secretly approved a massive commercial rezoning project for that specific area. That dusty plot of bare land was now the designated site for a sprawling multi-million-dollar shopping district. It was suddenly worth millions of dollars in immediate life-saving cash. All they needed was for Marcus to have the absolute legal authority to sell it out from under me while I was locked away. I waited in the suffocating darkness for my son to scream at them, to bravely defend his mother, to throw his vicious wife out of the room for daring to suggest locking me away in a sterile institution. Instead, the crushing final blow was delivered in Marcus's own calm, measured voice. "Get the conservatorship papers fully drafted by Monday morning," he said, without a single trace of hesitation, guilt, or regret. "She is old, and her mind is already slipping. She will not even know what she is signing. The devastating weight of my own son's words hung in the suffocating darkness of that cramped bathroom. For a few agonizing seconds, I thought my heart was going to physically stop beating in my chest. The violent trembling that had seized my entire body since the wine spilled suddenly just vanished. It was not replaced by tears or a hysterical breakdown. It was replaced by a terrifying, ice-cold clarity that washed over my mind like a freezing winter storm. In that exact moment, the endlessly sacrificing, fiercely devoted mother who would have gladly laid down her own life for her precious boy completely died. She was abruptly replaced by a hardened, fiercely protective woman who refused to become a helpless victim in her own life story. I pressed my ear against the cold wood of the door and listened intently as the three of them finally turned around and marched out of the office to rejoin their high society friends. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them. I stepped out of the dark bathroom and walked slowly over to Marcus's massive mahogany desk. The room was illuminated only by the faint, silver moonlight spilling through the large window, but it was enough for me to see exactly what I needed. Lying right there on top of his expensive leather desk pad was a thick black folder labeled with the name of Chloe's supposedly wealthy family estate. My hands were no longer shaking even a fraction of an inch as I reached out and calmly picked up that heavy folder. I tucked it tightly under my arm, completely ignoring the sticky, sour-smelling wine still soaking the front of my ruined dress. I did not go back out to the crowded ballroom to scream or make a scene. I moved like a silent ghost through the quiet back corridors of that massive house and slipped quietly out the heavy side door into the cool night air. I climbed into the front seat of my old, reliable sedan, locked the doors tightly, and placed the stolen financial documents firmly on the passenger seat next to me. I took one last long look at the glowing, glittering mansion where my son was busy plotting to lock me away in a sterile cage. Then I put the car in drive and pulled out of the long driveway, leaving my broken heart completely behind me. The very next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, I was sitting at the heavy oak dining table in the home of my brother-in-law, Uncle Terence. Terence was a brilliant, no-nonsense retired real estate attorney who had always protected our family fiercely. He had been my late husband's absolute best friend and the trusted legal architect who originally drafted his entire estate. I sat silently with a cup of black coffee while Terence carefully reviewed every single page of the stolen financial documents. The deep frown lines on his forehead deepened with every paragraph he read, his sharp eyes taking in the massive mountain of hidden debt and fraudulent bank loans Chloe's family had desperately tried to conceal. When he finally looked up at me, there was no pity in his eyes, only a dangerous, calculated fire. He closed the black folder firmly and rested his large hands on top of it. He told me that Marcus and Chloe were in far deeper financial trouble than even they realized, and that they were definitely going to move extremely fast to seize my land. But then Terence smiled a slow, cold smile that sent a shiver straight down my spine. He stood up, walked over to his heavy iron floor safe, and pulled out a thick stack of old, yellowing legal documents. He laid them out flat on the table and pointed to a specific paragraph buried deep in the dense legal jargon. He revealed the ultimate, completely hidden plot twist that Marcus, in all his arrogant confidence, had completely overlooked. My late husband had never fully trusted the corrupt corporate world. He had deliberately placed the absolute deed to Marcus and Chloe's current sprawling luxury mansion into an airtight, ironclad blind trust. I was legally designated as the sole, unquestionable executor of that entire trust. Marcus did not own a single brick of that massive estate. He only received the house free and clear upon his 40th birthday, and only if he absolutely did not violate a strictly defined morals and care clause regarding my physical and mental well-being. by officially conspiring to fraudulently declare me mentally incompetent to steal my personal assets. Marcus had just triggered the exact legal trap his own father had secretly built to protect me. I stared down at my late husband's bold signature on the bottom of that old legal document, feeling a massive wave of profound strength rising up from deep inside my chest. I did not shed a single tear for my son. I did not yell in anger or curse his name. I simply reached across the table, picked up my cell phone, and dialed the direct private number for the powerful asset management firm that handled the blind trust. A very polite, highly professional voice answered on the second ring. I stated my full name calmly and clearly, verifying my identity with the strict security codes Terence had just handed me. I informed the senior account manager that a severe breach of the primary morals and care clause had officially occurred. I gave the absolute irreversible authorization to immediately trigger the penalty protocols. In one single uninterrupted phone call that lasted less than 5 minutes, I legally froze every single financial asset Marcus had that was tied to his father's name. I completely revoked his access to the massive trust funds he used to maintain his fake high society lifestyle. And most importantly, I initiated the immediate aggressive legal transfer of the sprawling luxury estate property right back into my direct, unquestionable control. I hung up the phone and placed it gently down on the wooden table. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the past 10 years finally lifting entirely off my shoulders. They wanted to play a ruthless game with my life and steal my future, but they completely forgot who held all the winning cards. 2 days later, the bright morning sun was shining down on the sprawling back patio of the luxury estate where Chloe was hosting an incredibly lavish post-anniversary brunch. The same elite high society friends who had laughed at my humiliating wine spill were now sitting around crystal tables, sipping expensive mimosas and eating imported caviar. But this time, I did not arrive through the back door wearing a cheap store-bought dress. I walked straight through the heavy front iron gates, wearing a sharply tailored ivory pantsuit that fit me perfectly. My hair was professionally styled, and I wore a pair of dark designer sunglasses that hid absolutely nothing but commanded total respect. Flanking me on my right was Uncle Terence holding a thick leather briefcase and looking every bit the fierce, seasoned attorney he was. On my left was a heavily built state-licensed process server, clutching a thick stack of aggressively stamped legal documents. We marched right through the massive open French doors and stepped directly out onto the sunlit patio. The sudden heavy silence that fell over the brunch crowd was absolutely delicious. The live harpist stopped playing mid-song as every single elite guest turned their heads in complete shock to stare at the confident, powerful woman they had dismissed as a demented old fool just 48 hours earlier. Chloe dropped her crystal champagne flute onto the stone patio, where it shattered into 100 sparkling pieces. She demanded to know what I was doing there, and threatened to call the police to have me forcibly removed from her property. I simply took off my sunglasses, folded them carefully, and smiled a very calm, freezing cold smile. I nodded quietly to the process server, who stepped forward and slammed the heavy stack of legal documents right down into the center of Chloe's expensive caviar spread. I raised my voice just enough so that every single wealthy socialite sitting at those tables could hear me clearly. I announced that she no longer had the legal authority to remove anyone from the premises, because as of 8 o'clock yesterday morning, the property was entirely under my exclusive control. I watched the blood drain completely out of Chloe's face, as Uncle Terence loudly and methodically explained the asset freeze injunctions and the immediate eviction notices. He declared that Marcus had fundamentally violated the blind trust, and that every single dime tied to my late husband's name was officially frozen by the state. I told Chloe, right there in front of her absolute most important high society friends, that she had exactly 72 hours to pack up her fraudulent, bankrupt life and vacate my property before the county sheriff arrived to physically drag her out by her expensive blonde hair. The pristine, glamorous facade of Chloe's fake billionaire lifestyle completely collapsed right there on the stone patio. She had an absolute hysterical meltdown. Her carefully constructed high society manners vanished instantly as she began screaming at the top of her lungs, waving her manicured hands wildly in the air. She turned furiously to Marcus, demanding that he use his fancy law degree to fix the situation immediately. She screeched that he promised her the commercial land and the money. But Marcus was completely paralyzed, staring down at the irrefutable legal documents that proved his absolute ruin. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched Nia quietly gather her designer purse and slink away toward the side gate, completely abandoning her sister to the legal slaughter. The wealthy guests were already frantically whispering to each other, grabbing their expensive coats and rushing for the exits, desperate to escape the toxic fallout of a sudden bankruptcy. Marcus finally broke under the crushing weight of his own arrogant failure. His knees literally buckled, and he slumped down into a patio chair. He looked up at me with terrified, desperate tears streaming down his face. For the first time in over 5 years, he actually called me Mom. He reached out his shaking hands and begged me for forgiveness, swearing that the conservatorship was all Chloe's terrible idea, and that he never really meant to hurt me. I looked down at the pathetic, broken man I had sacrificed my entire youth to raise, and I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, hollow pity. I leaned in close so he could hear exactly how final my decision was. "You tried to bury me alive, Marcus," I said, my voice steady and completely unshaken. "You just forgot I own the shovel." Fast forward exactly 6 months, and the harsh reality of their consequences had fully settled in. Marcus and Chloe were officially evicted and forced to move into a cramped, poorly lit one-bedroom apartment on the worst side of town. They were completely drowning in a massive ocean of hidden debt, and without access to the frozen trust funds, their toxic marriage was rapidly falling apart under the severe financial strain. Meanwhile, I officially finalized the sale of that barren commercial land to the city developers for an absolutely staggering $8 million in pure cash. I bought a beautiful, comfortable home on the coast and started traveling the world, just like my late husband and I always dreamed we would. When I look in the mirror today, I do not see a tired, forgotten old woman hiding in the shadows. I see a vibrant, glowing survivor who finally took her power back. I am completely free, and I am finally living the beautiful golden years stories I was so cruelly denied for all those painful decades. Justice was entirely served, and my new life is absolutely magnificent. A mother's love is a profound and unconditional force. We gladly give our youth, our energy, and our whole hearts to build a strong foundation for our children to safely stand upon. But we must never forget, Cher, that our deeply earned dignity is not a simple floor mat for them to wipe their feet on when they finally reach the top. It is so incredibly easy to fall into the dangerous trap of believing that our endless sacrifices make us weak, or that our constant silence is entirely required just to keep the family peace. Please never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, convince you that your kindness is a vulnerability to be cruelly exploited. Getting older absolutely does not mean fading into the background or losing your personal power. In fact, it is quite the opposite. Sometimes, it simply takes an entire lifetime of harsh lessons, quiet hardships, and deep heartbreaks to finally learn exactly how to fiercely use that power. We earn every grey hair and every wrinkle through pure survival, and with that survival comes a fierce, unshakable wisdom. You always have the absolute right to demand respect and firmly protect your daily peace. If you have ever had to bravely stand up for yourself when your own family turned their backs on you, please let me know down in the comments below. I would absolutely love to hear exactly where you are watching from today and exactly how long you have been a part of our beautiful community. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to Her Golden Years Stories for even more empowering tales of absolute justice. And please safely share this specific message with a strong woman in your life who really needs to remember her true worth today. Goodbye.